to this church, join in community to sustain ourselves as we face challenges and rewards in our lives, to seek pathways towards fulfillment, to enjoy the support and fellowship we find from one another. Some of us do this mostly as a spiritual pursuit, a way to help bring us toward wholeness and a sense of engagement with the forces and energy of the broader cosmos. Some of us do this in pursuit of justice, as we seek collaborators and supporters in our attempts to steer our world towards fairness and peace. Some of us do this as an intellectual pursuit, seeking new ideas, stimulation, and exchange in our personal drive to make sense and meaning of our situations. Some of us do this for all these reasons and many more, and maybe mostly because we enjoy the good company and camaraderie of the people we know here. But we all come here accepting this place as a church, our church, even if we see it as redefining the meaning of church from everything we knew in our youth. And we understand that this church is associated with, a part of, a broader religion and religious movement known as Unitarian Universalism. I imagine we have some notion of what UUism means, what it's about, and how it relates to other churches and religions. If I were to have each of you prepare something that's like what we call our elevator speeches, where we define this church in a way that we can express it in the period of time it takes to get from the first floor to the third floor on an elevator, it would be interesting. I am sure the task would be easy for some, difficult for others, and that the results would be all over the place. It'd be sort of like the blind man and the elephant. How is it that we differ from a social club, a political association, or from a Protestant church? The one sort of rigid point we should all know and include that's sort of fundamental to us is that the UU faith does not teach religious creed or dogma. And we expect each person to engage in their own search for truth and meaning. Ideally, we help them in this and provide a supportive environment, a safe place for your searching and engagement. And it's my personal contention that we help one another in this task, and that the process of sharing difficult questions can be transformational and generative in our lives. But this is partly aspirational, and it truly only works if we really engage with one another on difficult questions, things about belief, ethics, goals, what matters. The non-creedal nature of UUism and our tolerance and acceptance of different points of view often leads to the misunderstanding that UUs can believe anything they want and that we're an anything-goes religion. And indeed, among our ranks, you will find a huge variety of religious points of view involved in people's own personal feelings, many of which sound unusual or even outre to the uneducated or more traditional ear. We're a home for atheists, agnostics, humanists, religious naturalists, pantheists, Buddhists, Taoists, Christians, Jews, Wiccans, people who practice Native American spirituality, and so many other ways of knowing and approaching faith. I'm sure I only touched the tip of the iceberg with that list. For most of us, these very religious approaches serve more as just sources, which along with other knowledge and our own direct experience of the world, and with all these things, we create our own alchemy, our own recipe to devise a religious understanding that works for us. But this is not anything goes. This is pluralism and diversity, reflecting the immense spread and breadth of human intelligence and emotion. We invite every person to explore what they know, what they feel, and what they experience, and to build from all of this the frame of meaning, an orientation to life, a way of interpreting meaning and purpose. In simple, every person is invited to engage in a personal theology, to determine what they hold as sacred and important, and what this implies for how they live. And while we don't tell people what answers they should find, we do have broad bounds of what is acceptable and appropriate in this effort and how we engage in the work. And over time, we've developed ways to define the domain of what should be brought into these discussions. And we've done this by mutual agreement, pretty much. 65 years ago, when the Unitarians and Universalists, it is a mouthful, isn't it? When the Unitarians and Universalists merged into a single religious body, the congregations agreed to affirm and promote a sense of principles, which eventually were modified to become the 7 principles that are familiar to most of us today, and which were just replaced in the UU bylaws. The main ethic of these, in my mind, really followed from the first principle, which affirmed the inherent worth and dignity of every person. So, any theology or thought line derived from a theology that denied this, that asserted that some persons or groups were innately unworthy, is inconsistent with our affirmed principle and is not in harmony with our understandings and our agreements of how to live together. We welcome persons as they are, where they are, as long as they don't bring agendas and ideologies that are in fundamental opposition to these shared values. That sort of sounds like we still have rules, but we don't usually police our boundaries, and it would become quite difficult and confusing if we needed to, as a matter of course. As a rule, this is a voluntary arrangement. People who harbor exclusionary ideas, like racists and xenophobes, or people who are really fixed in religious beliefs that they need to propagate and perpetrate, these folks just don't tend to join our congregations. And indeed, they probably shouldn't, and they should probably be challenged if they did. While it's not explicit in early UU lingo, most UUs speak of organizing our religion somehow around ideas of love. It is one of the most common words in our hymnal, and many congregations weekly recite some variant of unison affirmation as we do here. Each week, in Beverly Unitarian, we state, "Love is the spirit of this church, and service its law. This is our great covenant, to dwell together in peace, to seek the truth in love, and to help one another." Now, we don't have to do this because we're UUs. We made a choice as a congregation to include this in our liturgy. But the importance of love has been obvious and was central. It was central in the Christian traditions from which we respond, and where many versions of God is love are mainstream. Love your neighbor. It's interesting that Unitarians and Universalists could not find a language to allow us to include love in our self-description at the time of the merger, even though it was a central ideal in each faith. One problem, back in 1961, when I was still a wee lad, was that our historical traditions and our different cultures just didn't quite allow for this. We really didn't agree on who was doing the loving. Universalists were defined by the notion of God's love for humanity and the confidence that a loving God could never condemn any person to an eternity of pain and damnation. They believed in universal salvation. Unitarians, on the other hand, tended to see a human duty to express our love to God or whatever we held as sacred, to other people, and to the world. New language was adopted just last summer, 65 or so years later, to define the purposes and covenants of the UUA. Technically, this was a revision of Article 2 of our bylaws, a process that the bylaws require to be considered every 15 years or so. Article 2 was mostly familiar because this is where the 7 principles were located, along with statements of purpose, sources, and important information about freedom belief. I will not describe the new Article 2 in detail, although I will give you each a copy of it. I'll waste a few trees, and if we can, Gretchen will help on one side and Ken on the other. I'm going to hand out these documents. And let me stop for a minute and describe what they had, because it's really a hybrid piece of something. The pages that are numbered 1, 2, and 3, are the direct text of the new Article 2 of the UUA bylaws. And we'll talk about what's in them in a minute. The one that's not numbered, which is actually the second page in your handout, is my own quick summary of some of what the other one says in terms of our values. Basically, if you look at the flower picture that's on the front, you'll see that there are 6 values. They're all interconnected with one another, and they all surround the ideal of love. And this is a visual representation of what the new value statements really are. They believe that all 6 of these values are very important to us, and that they emerge from and are steered and guided by our commitment to an abiding love among ourselves and in the world. The values, justice, generosity, pluralism, transformation, equity, and interdependence, are each briefly defined, and after each definition, there's a statement of how we propose to engage with that value and what living into that value implies for how we should behave. That's done in covenantal language. And indeed, this whole thing is assumed as a basic covenant, something that we hold in agreement. Covenant's a word some of us have troubles with, and we can get rid of it, and if we think it carries hardware, it does it, whatever, but we're not going to get it out of people's minds right now. They think we have to talk that way if we're a religion. But really what we're doing is agreeing that these are what we hold and anchor our faith to. This is boundary setting. It's not a blood oath, but it is a clear statement of what we think Unitarian Universalists should hold in common. Can you be a UU if you don't fully agree? The answer is yes, especially if your differences are grounded in serious thought and personal integrity. But you probably can't stray too far from what we're agreeing on here and still feel comfortable in our congregations. It's just like we allow Republicans, but we don't see a lot of them here. Used to see a lot more. What excites me about this language is the explicit declaration that indeed love is the spirit of this church. It tells me that we believe in feelings and actions that are grounded in love and tested against a standard of love. And I really don't expect you all to read these deeply now, but I do hope that you take the opportunity to consider them in your own time and to think through what they are saying, because words are important. I totally lost my place because I keep ad-libbing. Now, love is a big four-letter word, and it's vague enough to make room for lots of things that we care about. Love, in one way of seeing, is a human virtue, an ethic, an abstraction. Love, in another way of seeing it, is the core of what we hold as sacred, what we're connected to. In another way, love is a feeling, an emotional attachment or bond towards someone or something. All of these things are love, and they each hold meaning. But two characteristics of love feel especially important to me here. First is that it's inherently relational. Love cannot exist in its own space. Love is a description of how we hold connections to things, and especially to other people that we care about. And the second is that love is expansive and active, and often compels action on our part as we live into the demands we feel it places on us. Love is a noun and a verb in our language, and we treat it as both here. The UUA statement of purpose, which comes at the beginning of this, sees that we can engage in the transformation of the world through what it terms liberating love. Love is also understood as a spiritual discipline, a way of living and knowing the world around us. Loving action assumes behaviors that manifest caring, compassion, and nonviolence. They demand empathy and grace in our relations with others. And loving action can be contagious and self-fulfilling, producing reflexive loving action, a mirror of our action from other people. But love alone in and of itself produces little, and hence the need for the other values that we see circling around it. They are guided by love, and they are also needed to guide our loving action. Take justice and heed these strong words from Dr. King. Power without love is reckless and abusive, and love without power is sentimental and anemic. Power at its best is love implementing the demands of justice, and justice at its best is love correcting everything that stands against love. Love at the center gives us a toehold in creating a working theology. UU theologies rarely study our relation to God. That's what the word means, but that's not where we've been for a long time. Instead, we examine connections between persons in the communities they live in as they seek to build faithfulness to our commonalities, our better selves, and our desires for peace, justice, and freedom. They are the study of the divinity within us and around us, whether that divinity exists or whether that divinity is the goal. So a theological exploration of love is a commitment to the relational way of being and to understanding the actions needed to maintain meaningful and healthy persons and communities of care. It is one way to find hope and to create a roadmap to the goal many of us hold and know as beloved community. I see that putting love at the center of our values and our covenantal agreements is a great step forward. and it gives us an active and insightful spiritual orientation. But we need to know and realize that centering love is not always easy, and it's not always clear or transparent how it's done. We request and encourage an atmosphere of safety and trust in our congregations, where people can share the deeply held beliefs that they need to share in order to connect and grow. And this is not without risk. As we know, we are asking people to become vulnerable, to put themselves forward, to tell their own stories in ways that often work against well-ingrained instincts for privacy and self-preservation. But that is what's required in order to build true community, honesty, and we can only rely on holding each other accountable to acting in a spirit of love and inclusion, if we do so in a forthright manner. We hold good values, but we have to recognize that they alone do not necessarily produce good outcomes. That depends on us and our influence on others. What good values do is they hold up a standard and show a call and a course for our action in life. Placing love at the center does not solve anything alone. Love per se has no power. It is us acting in and through love that brings power to this arrangement. Love works if it works through us. It is dependent on us, and it helps us. Placing love at the center helps us to claim and share a vision of what we know can be a better way to live. Placing love at the center helps give us confidence to see new possibilities and to focus on issues of ultimate importance. Placing love at the center is an act of faith and probably an act of resistance against a flawed status quo. Placing love at the center points us to hope. For many years, we believed that history was with us and that the arc of the universe was slowly, gradually bending towards justice, that progress was inevitable. Today, we are learning that we will need a faith that can sustain us in times of reversal as well as in times of success. What Article 2 says will not change the world, but it can change our world if it helps us to experience and find joy in a love that holds us and helps us to live as we wish to live, even in a world demonstrably indifferent to suffering. Let us live forward in community and in love. Ashe, amen, and blessed be. I will now ask you to rise and join in singing hymn number